Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Algae Corner. I'm Dr. West Bishop with CPRO Corporation. Today we have an exciting special episode on toxic, noxious, and smelly algae. In part one today, we're going to showcase a broad overview of many different algal groups that can cause significant impacts to humans and wildlife and their environment. Now, part two is going to be fully focused on cyanobacteria. Now, these are the primary culprits of negative issues in freshwater resources, and it takes a whole special episode to talk about those cyanobacteria. Now, before we jump in today, I want to warn you that some of the pictures you may see are quite graphic. Some of the things you'll hear about are, though real, though accurate, can be very, very disturbing. Now, before we really get started on the types of algae, there is one word that you're going to hear a lot today, and that is toxin. The toxicity of many types of algae to other organisms is from these compounds called toxins. So I thought it would be good to start with a general definition of toxin and really help set up some of the things we'll hear about later on. So toxins are biologically produced compounds that can impair the health or injure other organisms, especially at concentrations commonly encountered in aquatic resources. So again, something produced by the algae in this case that can impact humans, wildlife, or other organisms in the water resource. All right, let's get started here with our first algal group we want to talk about, and that's known as the golden algae. So that's just based on the coloration. They're pigments that they contain. So don't waste your time trying to collect them and sell them. It's just the color of the algae, and he is very small, around 10 microns long in the water. Now, the primary species of concern here is called Prymnesium parvum, but he does have an ugly cousin called Chrysochromulina parvum. Both of them can produce similar toxins and certainly pose risks to fish in the water resource. These are broadly grouped in the phyla Haptophyta, meaning they're small flagellated single cells that swim through the water column, and you probably don't know they're there unless you start seeing fish toxicity. So that's a problem with Prymnesium and its ugly cousin, is they both produce a whole host of different toxins known as prymnescins. These prymnescins can impact the gills of primarily fish, but other things that live in the water resource. Millions of fish die each year from blooms of Prymnesium parvum. Florida, Texas, California, Nevada, South Carolina are just a handful of the states affected, but it's been found in over 16 states throughout the United States. It does like slightly cooler waters, and is primarily found in freshwaters with higher salinity or brackish water scenarios, but it certainly can be broad spectrum and found in many different water resources. The next group of algae I want to talk about are the dinoflagellates. Now, this is an extremely diverse and very large group of algae that produce many different types of toxins. Some of the most widely known dinoflagellates are responsible for red tide events. These are primarily in the ocean or in marine environments that shut down ocean beaches and impact ocean invertebrates and fish. Some of the genera of algae common in red tide events include Gymnodinium, Gonilux, Alexandrium, Karenia are some of the most common ones you hear about that create these red tide events. Now, one of the main issues with red tides is the production of the toxin. Remember, we talked about and defined toxin, but they produce this toxin called brevetoxin. This is a very potent neurotoxin. It can relate to inhalation, consumption, dermal exposures, so we can be exposed to this toxin in many different ways. Often you hear about it built up through shellfish. So it can build up in the shellfish, they concentrate the algae, they concentrate this toxin, and can be exposed to humans that eat the shellfish. But again, these blooms can wreak havoc on almost any type of wildlife in the system, manatees, fish, invertebrates that come in contact with these blooms. Very large blooms that can be seen from space often are greatly impacted by red tide events. Tourism dollars are greatly impacted as well. Beaches are often shut down, but red tides produced by dinoflagellates are a very big group of nuisance noxious algae that certainly made our list today. One other dinoflagellate of note that I want to mention is called Pfiesteria. Now, this is often more in brackish waters or intertidal zones, even into fresh waters, but this again can produce some potent toxins and negatively impact fish, and it's caused billions of fish kills throughout its history. So that's another dinoflagellate. All right, one other group of algae, the next one we're going to jump into and talk about, are the rhapidophyte algae. Now these are small flagellated algae called heterocont algae, meaning they have two flagella of different sizes. Now some of the common types here are Chatonella and Heterosigma, are these rhapidophyte groups. They're different than dinoflagellates, they're in a slightly different group, but they can produce large marine and estuarine blooms with high toxicity and produce that same toxin, brevetoxin, as the dinoflagellates did. These blooms can be referred to as red tides as well, but they're often referred to as brown tides because of the coloration of them. The next group of algae we're going to talk about are the diatoms. So most diatoms are good for a water resource. Some are very good, but there are a few types that can negatively impact animals and humans as well. So one of particular importance in the marine environment is called Pseudonychia. This can produce domoic acid. So domoic acid is another toxin that is produced by this algae. And the problem with this toxin is that it accumulates in shellfish and again moves up the food chain into whatever eats it. Domoic acid can negatively impact the gastrointestinal tract, the central nervous system, the cardiovascular system, essentially a lot of different impacts from this toxin on human health as well as animal health. Now, one of the most common impacts of consuming this toxin is memory impairment. You have a hard time understanding and remembering things after you're exposed to domoic acid, and that's led to its name, appropriately named amnesic shellfish poisoning. And this, again, this toxin, blooms of Pseudonychia, have shut down all sorts of shellfish industries. A couple of years ago in the western United States, the shellfish industry was shut down from Mexico to Alaska because of a massive bloom of Pseudonychia producing this toxin. So it can build up, it can cause great issues in higher animals like sea lions and humans that eat the shellfish that accumulate this toxin. Another algae of great concern is actually a seaweed, a large kelp that grows in the marine environment, and this is called Caulerpa taxifolia. Now it's highly invasive in marine environments. It often gets around through the aquarium trade. So people buy it, they put it in their aquarium. When they get tired of it, they dump it out in the ocean or intertidal zones, and this can greatly spread by this mode of getting around. Now this alga has unique dissected fronds that look like a feather, hence its nickname, the feather alga. And there's a whole book on this organism and its invasiveness and how it can wreak havoc in the marine environment. And it's a book by Alexander Minus called Killer Algae. So in short, this made our toxic, noxious, and smelly algae list because it can do some great and terrible things when introduced to the ocean. First of all, it can produce toxins. These can greatly impact fish and invertebrates, sea urchins that live in the water resource, as well as it can grow so thick it creates these vast meadows on the ocean floor where nothing else can survive. Basically thousands of acres of just Caulerpa choking everything else out and certainly not moving up through the food chain. So again, very potent, nasty marine kelp. That is the Caulerpa taxifolia. Now the next group of algae we want to talk about is a freshwater group called euglenoids. So euglenoids have been documented to produce a potent fish toxin. That's an ichthyotoxin, it's called. Dr. Paul Zimba has done a lot of the work here and documented the toxicity of many different Euglena species, including Sanguina and Granulata, to fish. So Euglena are flagellated cells. They have two flagella, they can swim around, but they also have this pigmented eye spot, so they can sense different light intensities, they can see, and they can move throughout the water. And they often go into this resting state cyst. They produce more of the pigment astaxanthin that looks red, and they can pop up to the surface of the water body in some of the pictures you'll see here and form this resting stage cyst scum, this red scum on the surface of the water body. Now the problem with Euglena are these fish toxins greatly cause fish toxicity, so keep an eye out if you see this red coloration in your water body, particularly this red scum. Okay, as you can see, there are many types of algae that can produce toxins and cause impacts in different ways. From small flagellated phytoplankton to these large multi-celled marine kelp, algae can cause devastating impacts to the ecological system, wildlife, and humans. So what I did today was just a broad overview of many of the toxic, noxious, and smelly algal groups, but there are certainly more I couldn't cover. So if you're thinking of one that I missed, don't hold it against me. Many of the ones I talked about today are marine, but there are quite a few that can bridge into the freshwater environments like the haptophytes and euglenoids. But one of the primary groups in freshwaters that I want to talk about are the cyanobacteria. So I didn't spend much time talking about cyanobacteria in this episode today. There's so much information on cyanobacteria that we created a whole second episode, special episode, just focused on cyanobacteria and their impacts. So cyanobacteria produce many different types of toxins. They're primarily in freshwater, but can certainly bridge into estuarine and marine environments. And there's just so much information that you need to tune into our special episode on toxic, noxious, and smelly algae, just focused on cyanobacteria. So please see our next episode, part 2, focused on cyanobacteria, for more information on them. And thank you for tuning in today to the Algae Corner with me, Dr. West Bishop.